So this panel here is called The Importance of Youth Engagement in Public Policy. And our panelists are Lincoln City Councilwoman Sandra Washington. Um, Sandra Washington is a city council person in Lincoln, Nebraska, and sits on boards of Nebraska Trails Foundation, Lincoln Community Foundation, National Parks Conservation Association, and the Emeriti Board of American Association of State and Local History. Sandra worked with the National Park Service for nearly 25 years, holding positions in planning, training, and development, environmental compliance, and as a park superintendent before becoming Midwest Chief of Planning. Highlights of her career include the agency-wide policy manual and the creation of 5 new national park units. Sandra retired in 2014 as Associate Regional Director of the Midwest Region for Cultural Resources, Planning, Construction, Communications, Legislation, and Congressional Affairs. She holds her bachelor's and master's degrees from The Ohio State University School of Natural Resources and is a lifetime member of Girl Scouts USA. We also have State Senator George Dungan. State Senator George Dungan serves as Legislative District 26 in Northeast Lincoln. Before being elected to the Nebraska legislature in 2022, Senator Dungan was a Lancaster County public defender for 9 years. He holds a Juris Doctorate from American University and a Bachelor of General Studies from the University of Kansas, double major in political science and women's studies. So, yep, your panelists.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Sandra Washington, and I'm really glad to be here this afternoon. I got the invitation about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, and I hem and hawed because I thought I have a really busy week. And I am so glad I said yes to this because I needed this kind of conversation about climate change and what we can do about it. So thank you for all of you attending this conference or this workday, this forum. And I look forward to hearing what Senator Dungan has to say as well about the state level. Um, from my bio, you know that I worked at the federal level for a number of years. I trained as an environmental scientist, primarily ecology, and worked out in the field for about 5 years with Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and then I moved to the National Park Service. And I primarily focused on environmental compliance, and then I stretched into other areas, which means I'm really interested in things that are very nerdy, very wonky, around, yeah, nerds, around the National Environmental Policy Act. It was not unusual during my career and even after I retired to read an environmental assessment and think, this is interesting reading. I still do. Um, but now I'm an elected official, and my first responsibility as an elected official is to look out for the well-being of the residents of my community, which is Lincoln. And I don't mean just like look out for making sure they're happy or comfortable, but really to look out and make certain that I have set the community up for success, both families and businesses, and that I am looking not just at the short term, what's happening today and what they need right now, but I'm really have my eyes on the horizon that's 40, 50, 60 years out. Because it doesn't help us if the only thing we can think about is tomorrow or within the next 5 years, because it's much too short-sighted. And when we bring up the topic of climate change, it is the pressing topic of our generation. Is how are we going to be responsive to the reality of climate change? Um, Goodness, there's a lot of stuff that I could talk about, and I joked with Ken Winston that I had 45 minutes of lecture prepared today, but instead I'm going to take it just a little bit off skew. So I read a lot of different things, and this is called The New Grand Strategy, and it's probably a book that you have never heard of, and you may never ever have seen this book anywhere. But it was put together by a bunch of folks from the Department of Defense when they were asked almost 20 years ago, what's the next grand strategy for the United States to make certain that we are secure and prosperous? And they went out and started reading and thinking and coming up with things. And they said the one thing that America needs more than anything is a focus on sustainability. This is the Department of Defense. And they said the best way for us to be secure in the future is to be focusing on sustainability, which means focusing in on how to be resilient, how to continue to grow and be prosperous. And that means paying attention to climate change, as well as some other economic stuff. But I won't go into the guts of this book. But I'll tell you that when we think about being sustainable in the future, we're looking at how can we make certain that the systems that we put into place continue to operate without overburdening our resources. And they set us up to having the kind of life that we want to have in the future. And I don't actually mean mine. I mean, if I'm ever so lucky to have grandchildren, it's their grandchildren that I'm thinking about, not mine. So here in Lincoln, some of the things that we're working on in order to make certain that we have a community that is vibrant and successful and resilient is a climate action plan. Yay! Yeah. Woo. This morning, you heard Kim Morrow, who now works as the sustainability officer for the city of Lincoln. She was actually very a critical piece in getting this climate action plan written as a contractor that we hired to do that. And this plan, though it's fairly thick, but mostly it's about actions. So there's a narrative that's philosophical and flowery and really draws you in, but it says, but in order for us to actually put this into place, here are, and we started with over 600 different actions. We whittled it down to 221, and then we prioritized about 100 that we could do in the next 5 years. And that is, it may seem overwhelming or daunting, but this is the kind of policy work elected officials have to support if we don't actually, come up with the idea. And I don't expect electeds to come up with all the ideas. I don't even expect them to come up with a handful of ideas. I expect them to be listening to other people, by taking other people's good ideas and suggestions. And the best way for an elected to fulfill their role is to say, what can I do to help? What needs to happen in order for this idea to move forward? Do you need resources? Do you need someone to clear the path, get rid of the hurdles? How do we help you get this work done? Our job is to look at the big picture and to be thinking about how things connect and interconnect, and then to remember that every person who is affected by this plan or this idea, this strategy, is a real human being. So it's compassion, it's a huge amount of curiosity, and then the ability to problem solve at the policy level to make it possible for folks to get creative solutions or to find creative solutions to solve our challenges. It takes a lot of planning, and planning may seem like a boring thing if you have dreams of, I don't know, whatever your dreams are. Very few people grow up and say, I want to be a planner. But people who plan are people who are able to analyze huge amounts of data and come up with creative solutions to the challenges we face. It just helps us make better decisions. So I would encourage you, no matter what you're doing, no matter what your dreams are, to think about how good planning supports you, and to also be aware that everything is connected. When we're looking at policy about climate change, we're also looking at the same time about affordable housing, which is a critical piece of our communities being like successful, but that's not the word. So, but if we want our communities to be successful and to make it possible for every person to thrive, we have to have affordable housing. We have to have a secure food system. We have to make sure we have a stable or a good education system, stable economy. Lots and lots of things go into that. And all of those things can be seen through the lens of climate. So we're working on affordable housing action plan, a local food system plan, a comprehensive plan, land management plan for the county, a transportation plan, and 100 other plans. But it's really important that we run a thread through each of those plans that focuses in on climate change or the realities of climate change, so that when we're making a decision about transportation, we're thinking about what are the transportation networks we need in 50 years. How do we help the planet today by changing the buses that we have today, about looking at routes that we have today, and all of those things. And with that, I look forward to the conversation we'll have in a few minutes. Senator.
Thank you. So I'm Senator George Dungan, and I am nowhere near as prepared, I don't think, for this as Councilwoman Washington was. You have a real subject matter expert in the environmental issues that y'all are talking about here today with her. And we walked in, and I sat down, and I didn't really have any notes. I thought about what I was going to say, kind of wrote it out on my phone, and she pulled out this 100-page document, and then a book, and then a flow chart. And I started. I should jot down some notes, I figured. So. I just want to say thank you all for having me here. This is a really exciting opportunity, and I'm really, and I mean this genuinely, inspired by the fact that there's so many of you here. When I came in and walked in the back door, I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't this many of you, and it certainly wasn't this many folks that are involved or interested in these. That's not what these issues. If you let me get cheesy for just a minute, the kind of people that you are people who care and you want to make a difference. And we don't have enough of that right now involved in government. Just a few minutes ago, that plate dropped back there, and like 7 people jumped up to help. And that doesn't happen in a lot of places, right? In a lot of situations, people turn a blind eye. They don't necessarily want to get involved in issues, but there's a certain kind of person and a certain kind of individual that wants to try to make a difference. And it's not always easy. And it can be exhausting, and it can be frustrating. And believe you me, being involved in our state legislature is often frustrating and exhausting. But every single day in the Capitol, we have folks who come there who are excited, interested, passionate, and they're the people that actually come to that Capitol and make a difference. And so I just want to take a minute to thank you all for having me here. Because it's really inspiring to folks like us to be able to come to these kind of settings and see the next generation saying, we're done. We're going to put our foot down and we're going to do something about these issues. We've screwed it up. And it's unfortunate that it always falls on the next generation. But I think the fact that we have the youth involved in this issue gives me hope that it's going to get fixed in the future. And so I just want to say thanks for everything you do. Part of the reason that I was asked to come here today is that I've taken a particular interest in a couple pieces of legislation and working at the state level to continue a lot of the amazing work that we see at the city level all across our state when it comes to environmental laws. As the introduction said, my background is not in environmental policy. My background is as an attorney. I was a public defender here in Lancaster County for almost 10 years. And so when I came to the legislature, my background and a lot of my subject matter expertise was in the law, specifically criminal law. But as Councilwoman Washington said, one thing we all know is that the environmental issues that are facing us right now, climate change, what have you, those really are pressing issues that are of our time and that affect everyone. And so when somebody comes to you and says, are you willing to work on this piece of legislation, or what are you going to do about this? It feels like to me that it's necessary for us to step up. And so this last legislative session, I brought a few bills. I'm not going to go over all of them and bore you, but I brought a few bills that directly relate to very small changes that I think can have large impact on climate change in general. One of those that I was particularly excited about, LB 49, if anybody wants to go look it up, was a bill that we brought this last session that pertained primarily to the ability for a homeowner to put solar panels on their house. So, sounds like a pretty simple subject, right? You own a home, you think you'd be able to put solar panels on your own house. Unfortunately, across this state and in many other states, there are a number of contracts, covenants, whatever you want to say, but mainly homeowners associations that say they think solar panels look ugly. And if you buy a house in our neighborhood, you don't get to put a solar panel up. And what's especially frustrating is that a number of these covenants that you sign or contracts that you sign with these HOAs, it's not always clear whether you can or can't put them up. And so I was actually contacted by a number of people who talked to lawyers and thought it was okay for them to put solar panels up on their house, invested thousands of dollars in doing it, and then were contacted by their HOA saying, you have to take that down, or we're going to pursue legal action against you. And it turns out it costs them thousands, actually more money almost, to take them down than it does to put them up. And so to me, that seemed like a problem, right? People in our communities who are doing small things in order to make this world a better place should be able to do so on homes that they own. So we brought a piece of legislation to address that problem. One thing you'll probably figure out if you get involved in legislation moving forward is that it's never quite as simple as you think. So you read a bill, you introduce a bill, you think it's going to have one effect, and then 17,000 people show up at your committee hearing and tell you all the ways that it is bad or could be changed or they don't like it. Some of those are legitimate and some are illegitimate. And so over this last interim session, we have been working with partners to find ways to craft that bill, change that bill, and amend the language of that bill to make it, A, achieve the goal that it was intending to achieve, and B, not have any negative consequences on the back end for other environmental causes. And so I'm proud to say that, that bill, although it didn't go anywhere this last session, we are reintroducing it this year. I'm not just going to let it sit in committee. We're actually bringing a whole separate bill to try to achieve the same goal, to try to make sure that homeowners who are trying to do something about these issues can do that on their own property. So we're going to continue to bring that bill and fight on behalf of homeowners who want to put solar panels up to stop HOAs from saying you can't do that. So that's one small thing we're doing to try to move forward with that. Another thing that I've been doing this interim session, and for those who don't know, the interim session is just this time between when we're actually in the legislature, is I'm doing an interim study on the economic development and the impact on economic development that comes from investing in green energy. So what does that mean? When you get to the state level, a lot of people care way more about dollars and cents than they do maybe the actual policy issue. And so when we talk about investing in more green energy as a state, whether it's solar or wind or any of the other different facets of energy we have, the question you get a lot of times is, well, how is that going to help us? Because they don't necessarily always care about the environmental issues. They're thinking dollars and cents. How's that going to help Nebraska? Well, what we know is that across this country, there are major corporations and businesses who are looking to grow and develop in states that are investing in green energy. And so, if you're talking about Google or some other massive corporation like that, a lot of times they want to expand their workforce into states that have decided that investing in green energy is important to them. And so we've seen in other states an investment in green energy actually brings back a lot of money into the state because these companies and corporations say, hey, we like what you're doing, and we're going to come invest in you. And so you see big dollars come back into the state. You see workforce jobs get created because of that. And so rather than just say that and have people say, prove it, this interim, we've been collecting data, talking to a lot of corporations, talking to a lot of folks in the green energy world, and trying to collect that information. So that way, in this next session, when we continue to bring bills that are investing in those green energy solutions, we can back it up with numbers and say that we know this is going to make a difference for our state, both environmentally, but also economically. And so I think it's really, really important to do that. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of those, and I know we're probably running a little short on time, but last thing I wanted to say, one thing Ken asked me to talk about in particular, was about the importance of getting involved at the state level, at any level of government. And so what I can tell you is advocacy at the Capitol makes a difference. We saw it this last session. We see it every single session, but getting involved and coming to the Capitol, talking to your legislators, reaching out to people who are curious about these things, it has a real impact on whether or not legislation gets passed. The way our current system works is when a bill gets introduced, it has to get a hearing. Every single bill in Nebraska that gets introduced at the state level has a hearing in front of a committee. It's actually pretty cool that we get that in this state. Not a lot of states do that. At that hearing, they're public. Anybody who wants to can come in and can testify on those bills and say why they like it or why they don't like it or why they're neutral on it. I've sat in these committee hearings and I have had my opinion changed by virtue of the testimony of people who come in. And if people come in and testify at these hearings and they're passionate and they're informed, you can actually have an impact on whether or not a legislator votes for or against a bill. And that's not just me trying to make you feel good. I'm telling you, legitimately, my opinion has been changed by actual advocacy. And the number one thing that I tell people about this is don't be nervous. And that's saying a lot. But you get into this room, it's very official. You have a bunch of senators sitting up there, and they're in their suits and their ties, and they're all pissed off, and they've been there all day. And you get up there, and you're nervous, and you have 5 minutes to talk, maybe 3 sometimes. And there's a little green light in the front. And that green light turns yellow when you have 1 minute left, and it turns red when you're out of time, and people start to get nervous, and they freak out. What I want to tell you, and I don't know how recorded this is right now, you know a lot more than a lot of these legislators, right? State senators like to act, all of us, like we're experts. We're not, right? We're people. They may be experts. I may be an expert in one very small thing, right? I have my background, my legal background, very niche area that I consider myself well-versed enough in that I can actually maybe be an expert in. Everything else, they're doing their homework, they're trying to learn, they're well-meaning, but they don't know as much as you. So when you come to the Capitol or when you talk to a legislator or a council person or a county commissioner, be confident that the reason you're there talking to them is you care about it and you know about it. So don't let people act like you don't actually know what you're talking about because you are the subject matter experts in this area. So please, please, please get involved, come to the Capitol, talk to your senator. It can and frankly will make a difference. So please reach out. We're always there for you. And I'm just looking forward to seeing many more of you down at the Capitol, hopefully in this next session. So thank you very much for having us. And I think we had also talked about maybe doing a Q&A if people had any questions. I don't know what the time is on that, but Ken, do we have a few minutes to answer some questions? 5 minutes.
Yes, and then I'll come over to you. Right here. Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
Senator Duncan, about the next legislative hearing, are there any bills that any of your, I guess, any of the other senators have proposed that we should be on the lookout for?
At this juncture, we're early enough in the sort of interim that I've not gotten a chance to talk to most of my colleagues about what their bills are going to be. I can almost promise you, yes, there's always a handful, maybe like 10, 15 bills that are going to directly impact the subject matter that's important to us here. But stay on the lookout for that. And if you stay involved in a lot of these organizations and groups, they'll make sure you know about that. So I would imagine so. And when you get to that point, and when the legislature starts introducing bills, you can go look at the different committees and see what bills are in front of those committees. The Natural Resources Committee is where so many of these bills that you care about are going to be. So make sure you kind of go look at what their lineup is.
Senator, do you have a deadline? What's the date on the calendar for when bills have to be introduced?
So the legislative session starts this year, January 3rd. The first 10 days of the legislature are bill drop days. So bills can be introduced up until the 10th working day of the legislature, and then after that, it's locked in. So by that 10th day, which I can't see a calendar in my brain, I don't know which day that would be, but by that 10th day of the legislature, you'll know all the bills that are introduced. So therefore, on day 11, you can kind of get a sense as to what you should be focusing on. And generally, they don't start committee hearings generally, until bills have been introduced. That can always change in a short session, but you have those first 10 days to kind of get your feet under you and find out what's going to be important.
This gentleman right there.
So, Senator Duncan, you talked about LB 49 and that it faced challenges in the Senate in this session. I was wondering, since you're both politicians, What kind of pushback are these renewable bills having in session in more detail?
Well, specifically with LB 49, I mean, homeowners associations do have a pretty active group that support them. And homeowners associations do serve an important role in a number of circumstances, right? HOAs exist for a reason. What we're trying to do is strike that balance between allowing them to exist for that purpose that is helping the people they're trying to work with and that's not hurting them. You know, frankly, a lot of these bills, when they get introduced for the first time, like I said, there's unintended consequences, right? There was a provision in LB 49 that specifically referenced leases also being invalidated if a lease said that you couldn't put solar panels on that, which of course the landlords and their representatives did not like that either, right? So you can get pushback in those circumstances, and again, understandably. And so you have to then go back to the drawing board and say, what is the actual goal we're trying to effectuate with this legislation? And how can we recraft this to ensure that we're looking out for all of the interests and balancing those policy interests in a way that still effectuates change, but also is likely to get done?
And at the local level, a lot of local bills or local ordinances start at the state. The state might give us a direction, then locally we say, oh, okay, this is how we're going to implement it. But and in Lincoln, we have a lot of zoning code and a lot of things. So if you're watching City Council, you'll see a lot of items on the agenda that deal with zoning code. And zoning code is like the nerds' playground. We have a lot. It's all in planning and building and safety. But you look at that code and it tells you what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do in different parts of the community based on the kind of area it is. And so we have residential areas, we have business areas, we have industrial areas, and I won't go into the 100 deviations or delineations within that. But when we've had people come forward and say, I want to put up a wind turbine, or I want to put up a solar panel, we look first at the code and we go, it's allowed in your area. This is the size restriction. And even though it's an allowable thing and it's the size restriction, we still get people say, oh, but I don't like it. I don't want to live next door to that. And people can always ask for a variance, like a slight change to code to give me permission to have a slightly larger something or slightly taller. And I think there was I won't go into the address. I remember this well because we had to hold this over. At the local level, decisions get made fairly quickly. By the time it's on the agenda, um, either you're going to see a first reading, which means you read it for the very first time that week, and the next week, either it is being heard and voted on immediately, or it's being heard and then a week later it's voted on. So as opposed to the state legislature where you have multiple committee hearings and the possibility for having a conversation of somewhat, at the local level, the conversations are all happening almost before it's heard or read into the agenda for the first time, read into the record for the first time. And so sometimes we have 1 week or 2 weeks in order to have that conversation. And it's not all at the dais, it is from phone calls and emails and people stopping by and saying, I really want to have 10 minutes of your time. But in this one situation, a person really wanted to become net zero as much as possible. They wanted their solar panel to be not much bigger, but like 3 square foot bigger than allowed. But the number of people who came out and said, we hate this idea, was amazing. We did allow it, but it didn't go down as easily as you'd think. You know, I got a couple of letters like, you really hate neighborhoods, don't you, because you allowed this to happen. No, but that's the decision I made for this one project, and I thought it was a fair decision for the homeowner, and I thought it was not detrimental to the neighborhood.
Well, thank you so much for answering. I know for myself, I really love the nerdy specific details, so thank you.
Yeah. The woman in green. Oh, one more question? Okay, one more question. The woman in green.
I know that social activism is a huge thing when it comes to climate change. So how does the Lincoln Climate Change Action Plan address social activism? or just social injustice because how certain neighborhoods have more of the negative consequences than other neighborhoods.
Yeah, you're talking about environmental justice, and the action plan talks about a need to reduce that. Those are words on paper. It really comes down to what are we doing in our actions? What are we doing in our decision making? In the last 2 or 3 years, I've been working with someone in the mayor's office. It changes as staff changes on an equity framework, an equity analysis framework. And it was based on my long professional career of environmental analysis and always looking at environmental justice, because under the National Environmental Policy Act, environmental justice is an issue that you must address. But I was noticing we weren't doing this at the local level. And so I said, let's get an equity framework developed so that we can analyze whether or not a decision is equitable. And we're beginning to beta test this with about 3 different departments, and it's going well in some instances, and it's showing us where we need to make improvements. But my hope is that when this equity analysis actually gets put into place across the city, that we will be able to be much more conscientious about making certain that the right people are at the table when decisions are being crafted from the very beginning, and that we're paying attention to the discrepancies or the changes in impacts on different communities. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.